comes to master scheduling, there are some inherent barriers or guardrails that school leaders often find themselves having to work within. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that there may be aspirational ideas that they would love to do that may not be possible or realistic for them at the moment, given some of the constraints they may find themselves operating under. Like union expectations, adding an advisory is sometimes considered prepping for an additional class, those kinds of things. Sharing staff with other buildings in their district. We see that especially in our multi-age school structures. In those cases, bell schedule is often determined if it's a 712 building, the high school drives the bell schedule. Transportation, when students can get in and out of the building, and what the busing times are, cafeteria size. So some of these logistics that are not immovable objects but more challenging to move do factor in when a school leader is considering what's possible with their master schedule. And they can be advocating for change with those things long term, but that may not mean for the 25-26 school year that they have agency over those factors. So it is important, regardless of what barriers or opportunities a school leader finds themselves facing, that master schedule changes don't just develop out of perceived needs, but that they take the time to actually assess needs. I think the work Anne has at the beginning of our Successful Middle School Schedule book that calls school leaders to really evaluate how their values are playing out in the schedule. Are they trying to cram their values into the schedule, or does the schedule organically support the values, is a really meaningful step. I think that's beneficial even for schools that aren't necessarily considering schedule changes at this time, to go through the exercise of evaluating their schedule through that lens. And then keeping as many voices involved in the development of the master schedule as possible is also important. This is often work that a school leader finds themselves tasked with individually, but to develop a schedule that is successful for staff need a tremendous amount of buy-in, which means we need to be soliciting and honoring staff voice. But the students are the ones who live the schedule, so we need to be soliciting their voice and their perspective and hearing their ideas as well. And then especially in cases where schedules might change day to day, and parents may have other challenges within navigating the schedule on their end, parent voice would be tremendously important then. Some of our schools that have really innovative schedules that rotate or change every day have talked about, although that is another factor for parents to think about when they're preparing their child for the school day, they tend to be successful. And I think the bottom line is that when a schedule is successful, it's beneficial for students and it's beneficial for staff. So families are going to be on board and supportive of it. You can find research that supports that either is better. You can talk to educators in either experience and find out the pros and cons, the benefits and caveats to each. We do in the Successful Middle School, this we believe advocate for large blocks of instructional time for students to be able to engage in this work. We don't stipulate what that large block looks like or how frequently it should be happening. So for example, in traditional bell schedules where a class period may be 45 to 60 minutes long, what really would be most critical is that we're using those 45 to 60 minutes really well, so that students are, getting developmentally responsive teaching practices within that window, so that student-friendly learning objective that the teacher has worked so hard to develop is clear and students get to work with it during that time. If students are in a block schedule, one of the most common challenges with an extended block is that their attention span typically is not 90 to 120 minutes long. So how do we maintain students' attention so that that time is useful? And what teachers who navigate a block period often find themselves realizing is that it's not as simple as just taking 2 days worth of instruction and putting it into one block. That instead we have to think differently about how we instruct in the block and still meet the students' developmental needs while we have that extended period of time to work with them. So I think we can draw a conclusion that having time to work with our students is beneficial, and increasing seat time for subject areas that we're prioritizing is important, but that really what's most important, the characteristics of curriculum instruction and assessment from the successful middle school, this we believe are not bound by number of minutes, but instead about meeting the developmental needs of our students in how we instruct them and navigate curriculum. What really matters most, the most important bottom line, is not necessarily what a school day looks like for students, or even, the grade configuration of a school, but what we do with those students when we have them. So if a school is committed to meeting the needs of young adolescent students, but finds themselves with barriers to really innovating the school day to meet those needs, then they can still come together to meet those needs within their existing constraints. That sometimes looks like bringing advisory practices into the gen ed classroom a little bit more. If you can't at this point, this school year, pull time away from the schedule to develop a standalone advisory, then you can commit to advisory practices being embedded in part of your bell work. You can make sure it's part of your health and wellness curriculum. There are things we can do to honor these middle school hallmark practices, even within our constraints, and think creatively about making it work now while we advocate for the bigger picture change in the future. Any expectation we're putting on our teachers should be supported with adequate professional development to make that expectation happen successfully. I think there are many times that mandates come through the world of education, whether it's, state to district to school, or whether it's, district to school to staff. And we make decisions and then just expect teachers to make it happen successfully. But, the reality with advisory is where one staff member may be like, this is fantastic. You've protected time in the school day for me to build relationship with students. This is an asset. This is a gift. Thank you so much. We'll have other staff members at the same school who are losing sleep over this, who feel stressed over this unstructured time with students, who don't feel successful with that same time. So adequate professional development for practices like advisory, teaching within the block schedule, interdisciplinary teaming, and some of these other schedule related topics are so critically important, because just protecting time or taking away time for these things is not going to solve the underlying problems. Staff need adequate training to know how to function as an adult advocate. What are the intended outcomes of advisory? Why are we committing to this? Why are we protecting time for it? How do I then make that happen in my classroom, especially when there may be union constraints against me having another thing to prep for? So someone else may be developing these activities that I'm supposed to do. So how do I access them? How am I familiar with them? And teaching in the block schedule, again, it's not as simple as just teaching 2 days worth of content at once. We have to know the developmental needs of our students and what teaching strategies and approaches utilize that extended period of time well. How do we assess for understanding and differentiate instruction when we may see students every other day instead? Interdisciplinary teaming, working together with your colleagues, is not something that works smoothly right out of the gate. It takes work to function as a team and to support each other as colleagues across subject areas and meet those student needs together and understand how to assess and evaluate student needs together as a team. So professional development is critically important with any of these schedule driving topics in the world of the middle grades. No, not at all. Even just my experience as a teacher primarily in rural Indiana, I've had all of the above. So just my own singular experience reflects what we saw come out of our membership. And schedules are one of those things that tend to change, because we will believe that the challenges we're feeling as professional educators are because of the schedule. So we'll advocate for change if we had a remediation period built in, if we had the block schedule. And then what we sometimes find is that those challenges seem to persist. They might just be dressed a little differently. And that what's really at the root of it is, again, what are we doing with students when we have them, and the challenges that are inherent in education that aren't necessarily just solved by schedule changes. I think some of the factors that drive schedule considerations specifically in the middle school are primarily finding an opportunity for advisory and scheduling teachers for interdisciplinary teaming. And if those are some of the driving factors that send middle schools to really considering their master schedule, then it's going to take creativity to make those things work. Especially around the world of interdisciplinary teaming, because if you staff a school for interdisciplinary teaming, That's different than staffing a school by the number of students enrolled. And most districts are going to staff a school based on the number of students enrolled, which means that we have a number of really committed, really dedicated middle schools that aren't staffed for true interdisciplinary teaming. So they have to think creatively about their schedule and how they navigate staff time and student time to be able to make these practices work within those constraints. And I think that's part of what we see behind so many of the different variations of schedules is that schools have worked creatively to try to ensure that staff and students have what they need. I would say connect. Talk to other school leaders who have similar demographics, similar enrollment numbers, similar constraints that you do. Talk to them about what's working for them, what's not, what is their story, how did they get there. Connect with our schools of distinction since we have so many different models of what it looks like to do middle school well. Utilize our resources. We have so many companion texts now that really explain how middle school works in these specific topics. So the world of school leadership can feel lonely. A principal, that's a singular job. They're the only one doing it. They may be the only middle school principal in their district. So if they don't have a network to connect with and have these conversations, we do with our membership of over 35,000. So we can be the connecting point so they can have those conversations and be less an island in this work.